there, it is Sunday, so that calls for a new week of meals, a new what's for dinner to share with you. I'm so excited about this one because I snuck in a brownie recipe. It's a turtle caramel pecan brownie recipe, and it's just so good. It's honestly my favorite brownie recipe ever. I just don't think any recipe can compete to it, but maybe it can. That's just my personal opinion. But I hope you guys had a wonderful week this week. It started to get a little bit warmer here in Utah again, so back to the short sleeve shirts. But I hope you guys are all doing well, and I would love to have you over here at my channel, so go ahead and subscribe down below the video. But let's get cooking. To get us started off this week, I just wanted to start with our meatless meal first. So that's what we're doing. We're making some lasagna spaghetti squash bowls. This one's a really yummy one. So I'm just beginning with one medium-sized spaghetti squash right here, and I'm just slicing it in half. And then I'm going to be taking out all of the seeds from the center. I didn't mention this previously, but I did poke some holes on the backside of the spaghetti squash just so it would be easier for it to breathe while it is baking. So I just poured a little bit of olive oil on each side of my spaghetti squash, and I just brushed it on with my little brush. Now I'm just salting and peppering this for some added flavor, and I bake this in my oven on about 400 degrees, anywhere between 30 to 55 minutes. For me personally, it took about 40 minutes, but you just want your spaghetti squash to be pulling apart in the end. Here we are about 40 minutes later, and as you can see, it is pulling apart just like I said it would be, and it is beginning to turn into some spaghetti noodles, I guess you could call it. It's a great alternative to pasta if you're trying to stay away from carbs. So I just took out all of the center of the spaghetti squash, and I just put it in my medium-sized bowl. And now I'm adding my favorite marinara sauce, which is just this Prego brand. It's the traditional. I added a cup of that, and then you're also going to be adding a cup of this ricotta cheese. This recipe actually took me little to no time to prep it. It was a super simple one. So now I'm just adding about half a teaspoon of some Italian seasoning just for some added flavor, along with a half a cup of Parmesan cheese and a half a cup of mozzarella cheese, because you know cheese makes everything better. And then you're just going to mix everything up, and you want that ricotta cheese to break down and everything to get well incorporated. Moving back over to the outsides of our spaghetti squash, I'm going to be adding the mixture back into the center of them. If you don't want to be using the shells at this point, that's totally fine. You could just put this mixture in an 8x8 baking dish, and you're going to be baking this in the oven on about 400 degrees from 20 to 25 minutes. Here are the spaghetti squashes out of the oven. These came out really delicious. I was actually really impressed because the spaghetti squash really did resemble actual spaghetti noodles. So if you're trying to stay away from carbs, go ahead and try this recipe. Spaghetti squash is a great alternative to noodles. Now I'm going to be showing you how to make this really delicious creamy garlic chicken. This one's also pretty simple to make. So I just have my one chicken breast right here, and I'm slicing it thinly in half. You know I like to cook with my chicken breasts thinner in size. I just think it adds more flavor to them. If you want to add more chicken, you definitely can, but my family's a little bit small right now, so all I needed was one chicken breast. I'm just seasoning this on both sides with a little bit of some salt and pepper. Now I'm adding about a half a cup of some flour to my plate, and I'm just going to press these chicken breasts into that flour just so they get coated with the flour, and then I'm just going to set them on a separate plate. Over here to my saucepan, I have a tablespoon of some olive oil in there, along with a tablespoon of butter. I just let that butter melt down and let that oil get nice and hot. I did have my pan on medium-high heat at this point, and I just cooked these chicken breasts on both sides for about 3 to 5 minutes, just until it reaches the internal temperature of 165 degrees. And once it was all cooked, I just removed it to a separate plate. Here at the same saucepan, I did not wipe it. I did not remove any of the bits from the chicken. I just left everything on there. I just added another tablespoon of some olive oil, and at this point, I have my heat on a medium heat. I just added 1 diced onion in there, and I'm gonna let this onion get translucent for about 3 to 5 minutes. Now you see that our onions are translucent. I'm just adding our 1 1/3 cup of chicken broth along with our 1 1/3 cup of some heavy whipping cream. I'm just going to let this come up to a boil and let it thicken. I swear I am always forgetting the garlic. I'm forgetting to add it at the right time just because it's so little and it just sits on my counter. But once your onions were translucent, you're supposed to add 3 cloves of garlic in right before the chicken broth and the heavy cream, but I added it in at this point because I forgot. Anyways, to thicken the sauce up a little bit more, I wanted it thicker, I added a cornstarch slurry, which was just a tablespoon of cornstarch and a tablespoon of some water. And now I'm going to be adding in our Parmesan cheese. This is just a 1/3 cup of Parmesan cheese. And our seasonings, which is just a 1/4 teaspoon of some dried Italian seasoning, a 1/4 teaspoon of some black pepper, and a little bit of some salt to taste. I just whisked that to combine and I brought it up to a simmer. And now I'm just adding our chicken breasts back in there and I'm gonna let them heat up once again for about 3 minutes and, just let all those flavors infuse. Here is my plate. I just served it with some mashed potatoes. I honestly don't even know what I was thinking. I should have served it with some egg noodles, but mashed potatoes were just sounding really good that night. Anyways, if I were to make this again, I would just half the sauce because I made way too much sauce, or I would have just added some more chicken in there, but this was a fantastic meal. This recipe will knock your socks off. It is so flavorful and delicious. It's one of my all-time favorite meals. So to begin, in my saucepan, I'm just adding about a pound of some chicken breast in there. I did slice this chicken breast up thinly. I also added a 1/2 tablespoon of olive oil in there and a 1/4 cup of some of these sun-dried tomatoes and a little bit of some salt and pepper, and you're just going to want to completely cook this chicken up. Now that our chicken is completely cooked, I'm just going to remove it to a separate plate with the sun-dried tomatoes, but I am going to be keeping all of the oil in the pan. The oil is going to add so much flavor to the asparagus, you just wait and see. So now I'm going to be adding a pound of asparagus back into that pan. I did chop the ends off of the asparagus, and then I added a 1/4 cup of some sun-dried tomatoes along with a little bit of salt. I also added a tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of butter. I let this cook for about 10 minutes. Once our asparagus is almost through cooking, I'm going to be adding about 3½ cups of some uncooked tortellini into this pot of boiling water, and I'm going to let that cook. Here's my asparagus. It is to the softness that I like it to be. I just added back in our cooked chicken, and now you're going to be adding your basil pesto. So I added about a 1/2 cup of basil pesto. You could add more or less, a 1/4 cup being on the less side, a cup being on the more side, but my personal opinion thinks that a 1/2 cup is perfect. So I just stirred that all to combine, and once that was all thoroughly combined, I just added that into our big pot with the tortellini. I did, of course, drain out all the water from the tortellini. I just stirred this all to combine. Now I'm just adding my cup of sliced cherry tomatoes. I'm just going to stir this all together and let this sit with the rest of the ingredients for about 5 minutes, just so those cherry tomatoes warm up just a little bit. And here's my big bowl of pasta. I just served it with a breadstick and sprinkled Parmesan cheese on top. This is one of my all-time favorite meals. I really think you should make it if you like all of these ingredients. It is a total hit and it tastes so fancy. Now we're just making a classic. This is just some goulash. I love this meal because it brings me back to my childhood. It's just a really good classic meal. So to begin, I'm just slicing up 1 yellow onion into smaller pieces. Over here to my Dutch oven, I'm just adding this pound of some ground beef in there. You could also just use a large pot if you don't have a Dutch oven. And I'm just going to break this up and let this ground beef completely cook. As you see, it was still a little bit frozen. I'm just going to be showing you a little trick right here that my mom taught me while I was growing up. This is my favorite way of absorbing all of the excess grease once your ground beef is completely cooked. I just take a paper towel and I wiggle it around my pan with a spatula or a spoon, and just like that, it absorbs all of the grease, and it is just the easiest way to absorb grease. Now it's time to add our sliced up onion, so I'm just adding that in with our ground beef, and I'm just going to stir everything together for about 3 minutes just to let that onion get nice and translucent. Now that we have our onion softened, I'm just adding our garlic right in there. I'm just going to stir that garlic around for about 20 seconds or until it begins to be fragrant. So now we're going to be adding our water. This is just 1 cup of water. Next, our half a cup of beef broth, and then we're going to just scrape off all the bits from the bottom of the Dutch oven. There's going to be a lot of flavor in that. And then you're going to be adding your 1 15-ounce can of tomato sauce along with your 1 15-ounce can of diced tomatoes. To get our flavor action on, we're going to be adding a half a tablespoon of Italian seasoning, followed by a half a tablespoon of oregano, 1 bay leaf, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, a half a teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of garlic powder, a half a teaspoon of some pepper, and then you're just going to stir everything to combine. I brought this up to a boil, then I dropped it down to a simmer, and I let this simmer with the lid on for about 20 to 25 minutes. Here we are about 25 minutes later, and this is completely cooked, and my house is smelling so good at this point. I just removed the 1 bay leaf because nobody wants to accidentally eat a bay leaf, and now I'm just adding our 1 cup of tortellini pasta noodles in there. I just stirred this all together, and I let this cook for an additional 10 to 15 minutes or until those noodles are completely cooked. Here we are, and our goulash is all cooked up. It is looking really good. So now I'm just going to sprinkle some sharp cheddar cheese on top because cheese makes everything just that much better. And I just put the lid on and let that cheese melt down. Here's my goulash all cooked up. This came out so delicious. This is just such a classic meal, like I said previously, and it is just great for the fall. I just served it with a side salad. You're in for a little bit of a treat on this one. We're making some caramel turtle poke brownies, and holy cow, these are so good. So we're going to begin with our dry ingredients in a little bowl first. So I just added 1 cup of flour, a half a teaspoon of baking powder, a half a teaspoon of some salt, and then you're going to be adding 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. The cinnamon's optional, but it adds a burst of some flavor. Now that we have whisked our dry ingredients together, we're going to move over to my electric mixer, and we're going to be adding 1 cup of some melted butter along with 2 cups of granulated sugar, 3/4 cup of some cocoa powder. This is just the brand I used. And then you're just going to put the little mixer gadget on, and you're going to incorporate these ingredients together. You could use a hand mixer if that's what you have. Now that we have that all mixed up, we're going to be adding our 4 eggs in. You're going to be adding them 1 at a time, beating after each egg. Now that we've thoroughly beat all of our eggs in the batter, we're going to be adding our 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and once again, you're just going to mix everything up. Now that I've mixed our vanilla to combine, I'm going to be adding our dry ingredients that we made in the very beginning to the mixture, and I'm going to beat this to combine just so everything is well incorporated. Now I'm just adding in our chopped up pecans. This is just 1 cup of chopped up pecans along with 1 cup of chopped up semi-sweet chocolate chips, and I'm just going to mix this together with my spatula. Over to my 9x13 baking dish that I did spray with plenty of some nonstick spray. I added our batter right in there, and then I put this into my oven to bake on 350 degrees for about 30 to 35 minutes. You just want to check to make sure it is completely cooked. Now that our brownies are cooked, I'm going to begin to work on our homemade caramel sauce. So into my sauce pot, I added 1 cup of brown sugar along with a stick of butter, 1 tablespoon of water, and a little pinch of some salt. I just stirred this all together on a medium-low heat. I did stir it quite often, and you're just going to want to let that butter melt down. Once it did melt down and it started to boil like this, I rapidly stirred it very consistently for about 5 to 7 minutes. Once those 5 to 7 minutes were up, I just took it off of the heat. Now I'm just going to be adding 1/4 cup of some whole milk along with a teaspoon of some vanilla extract. Then you're going to want to completely whisk this up. You might see that it is looking very runny, but don't worry, just leave it on the countertop for like 15 to 20 minutes and it will thicken over time. Just whisk it occasionally. Here are my brownies. These are poke brownies, so I'm just poking holes in these brownies with this skewer, or you could use like a chopstick, but you just want a bunch of little tiny holes like this so the caramel could seep down. With this outstanding caramel sauce that we just made, I'm pouring a cup of it all over the top of our brownies. Then I'm going to be sticking these brownies into my refrigerator to cool off for about an hour to an hour and a half. Right when you think these brownies can't get any better, they certainly do. So now we're going to be working on the chocolate frosting. Into this bowl, I have about 3 tablespoons of some butter that I softened. I added 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, 1 tablespoon of some honey, and I beat these ingredients together to the best of my ability. And then after that, I added in a teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1 cup of powdered sugar, and 1 tablespoon of some milk. And then I just beat those ingredients together once again until they were completely smooth. I just pulled our brownies out of the refrigerator, and now I'm just plopping our chocolate frosting right on top, and then I just spread that out as even as possible. Now you see about 1/2 cup more chopped pecans right on top of those brownies that I added. And then on the very top, you're going to be adding the remainder of the caramel sauce. I just poured that as even as possible. Then I stuck this back into the refrigerator for another 30 minutes just to let that frosting set. But that step is definitely optional. That's just personal preference. And now your brownies are complete. These are the type of brownies that I pretty much crave every single day when I'm wanting a sweet treat. They are just that delicious. They're the best brownies ever, and I just cannot stop saying it. I just like to serve them with some vanilla ice cream on the side, and I think you'll love this one. And just like that, that is a wrap of another week of What's for Dinner. I hope you guys all enjoyed it and got plenty of some meal inspiration. I hope that you're enjoying fall this year. The leaves are starting to change colors on all of the trees, so it's starting to get really pretty and yellow and red and orange. But I hope you guys all have a wonderful, safe week, and I will see you in Wednesday's video. Bye for now.